Imagine having debilitating low self-esteem that kept you from pursuing your dreams. Today's guest was in that same position until she blasted through it to have a remarkable career. Now, she's all about boosting confidence and smashing goals, and is going to help you do the same. In this episode, we are joined by Dame Clarissa Burt. Yes, you heard that right. She has been knighted. On top of that, she's an internationally acclaimed supermodel, actress, producer, public speaker, winner of Celebrity Survivor, and founder of In the Limelight Multimedia. She's also the brains behind the Self-Esteem Regime, a book designed to help build confidence and self-awareness. Great to have you with us, Clarissa.
Wow. People say, Clarissa, my God, how many things have you done? And I go, well, how many years have I been on the planet is really important. So much.
Yeah, welcome. We can't wait to hear all about it.
It depends on how many years you've been on the planet, you know.
I had to be selective with that because I kept finding more and more, things that are just so interesting about your, past and your accomplishments so far. With that, I want to dive, straight into, kind of the start of a lot of it, because again, with what you've accomplished is pretty amazing. But it almost sounds like when I was, looking into your background, it may not have ended up quite that way, because if I understand correctly, around 20 years old, you started your career that so many people, dream about, which is you began in modeling. And just curious how that came to be and how that ultimately changed, or rather shaped, your life.
Yeah, well, I was always a tall, skinny kid. And so, my like back in the day when I was a kid, we didn't have computers and internet and cell phones and all of those sorts of things. But we had catalogs from Sears that used to show up twice a year, and it was spring and summer, and then it was fall and winter. And for me, that was my greatest source of entertainment. It was going to the Sears catalog and we're, immediately going to the women's section and immediately looking, like what was the fashion, which was nothing really to write home about, but what was the fashion and who are the models and how are they posing? What did their makeup look like? And that was really my go-to. As a younger child, I'm probably 4 or 5 years old, I loved watching on set because we only had 3 channels back in the day. And it was Saturday morning, or basically all day Saturday, you'd be able to catch some really cool movies with like Ava Gardner and Rita Hayworth and some of the most beautiful women on the face of the planet. And those were really my go-tos, immediately, apart from the fact that I was also Mary Poppins in the kindergarten play, which sort of set the stage, if you will, literally and figuratively for what was to come. And so when I was in the kindergarten Mary Poppins play, and I was singing Supercalifragilisticexpialidocious, which I could still do if you had some time. If you had a little time, I could wing it. But the idea that it was my first, as a 5-year-old, it was my first standing ovation. And I'm telling you, from that minute on, I was kind of hooked. I knew that I loved the stage, and I knew that I loved performing. Knew that I loved singing. I knew that I loved acting, and that applause was really inebriating. So it was a precocious start, if you will, at 5 years old. But and then again, just the idea of these women in the movies and the Sears catalogs, and I just wanted to be a model. Never thought I could, because I had buck teeth and protruding ears, and it's that typical ugly duckling story that we hear about. And I was living in New Jersey at the time, and I graduated high school there. And and the city was so close yet so far away at that point, because to get into this, I got a job in the city, long story short, as a secretary. But
and the city being New York, right? For those not familiar with
New York City. And so I was meeting people, I started to meet people, and I was in the garment district down on 23rd Street in New York. And I started just meeting people. And so a testing photographer, a makeup artist that was testing, they needed a model. And so I started out that way. And with those pictures, I shopped the best agencies in New York City, which were Ford, Elite, and Wilhelmina at the time. And I chose to go. I was chosen by 2. I went with Wilhelmina, and that's really where it started back in 1982, 3. I went over to Paris. I was homesick. It didn't work the first time I came home. And then here's a really funny story, you guys. And I think this is great for entrepreneurs that are listening to us right now. Is you got a lot of dreams and you make things happen even though you think that you can't, but then maybe you get tripped up. That was my moment. I got tripped up in Paris, and I got tripped up in the sense that I was homesick. I really needed to lose it. I wasn't, and by any stretch of the imagination, was I heavy. But in order to be modeling on, the high fashion shows, I needed to probably lose a little more baby fat. Let's put it that way. But this much, but still. And so I just wasn't ready. So I came back to New York City and I went to a temporary agency to find work. And they said, look, we have a job as a temporary secretary for the next 4 or 5 months at Revlon in it was in the 59th Street, top floor corporate. And I walked in and I was there for the amount of time, but as I was looking around, I could see all of these models on these posters all over the wall, all the Revlon campaigns, right? The beauty campaigns, mascara, lipstick. And I'm looking at these girls that were very famous back in the day, and I could have kicked myself because objectively I was looking at them and looking, I didn't want to be, I didn't want to be too full of myself, but confident enough to say, but I think I could do that. And I think I could even look like her. And you know what I mean? So I rushed myself as quickly as I could back to Europe. And this time I went into Italy. And that's where it really took off for me. I was ready. I was a little more honed in. I knew what I really, really wanted. I was a little older by a year or two. And I wasn't, I knew what homesick was. I was fine. Took off. And that's where everything really happened for me in the modeling industry. And it went really, really well. It was such a blast. I was on every major runway straight across the planet. I came home with 250 magazine covers and 2 different Revlon campaigns. So when that's really cool. So when I say, if at first you don't succeed, it's probably because you weren't ready or you didn't believe enough in yourself. Give yourself that time and it will come, or start working on yourself, the self-improvement, the personal development, read the books, take the courses, take the classes, get yourself involved with people that are going somewhere, that can really support you in your endeavors. And there you go. I mean, the next thing you know, I was really, really doing well and having a blast doing it.
How did you transition from modeling to acting, TV and movie?
Now, modeling and acting wasn't too difficult in the sense that I was living in Italy and I was already becoming known because of the work that I was doing. Remember that it's a mediatic venture, if you will. I mean, I'm on covers and I'm on TV and I'm on the runways and so slowly word gets out. And then I knew that I wanted to start acting. Remember Mary Poppins? I never forgot her. And so I had never had a singing lesson, a modeling lesson, an acting lesson. These were my God-given talents. Now, if you ask me to rectify a checkbook or anything that has to do with, legal or accounting or any contracts, I am not your girl. But when it came to the things that I felt confident about, I really, that's another really great lesson. What are you already intrinsically good at? What already is it, something that where you shine or where people have given you many compliments and you feel good about? That's probably the path you should be pursuing. I mean, it would have been silly for me to go into banking. I could never have been a bank teller. Do you know what I mean? It wasn't what I was supposed to do. So anyway, it was just an easy transition because I had gone to some agents that were acting agents then. And they were like, okay, let's get you started. Let's get you out there. And I did about 18 different movies. The one movie that did come to the United States was The Neverending Story Part 2, which was a Warner Brothers worldwide release. And that was, I think, translated into about 17 different languages all around the world. And really, it wasn't such a stretch for me to play the mean queen anyway. It didn't take a whole lot of acting ability for me to get it right. But I had a blast doing it. I did blast doing that movie. It was so much fun.
Most of your other movies were in Italian, though. Did you speak any Italian before you? Okay,
no.
But did you? No, not in the U.S. It wasn't until you started traveling and then you picked it up?
Yes. So I am 1,000% Irish. There's no Italian blood in me at all. So everything that I learned once I got there. I mean, I knew ciao and arrivederci before I left. I think everybody knows that. But then as I got there, you start to go out and you sit at the dinners, the branding dinners, because they're never ending. You just sit there for hours and hours and hours around the table. And what happens is you start asking, what does that mean? The words you hear the most you say, hey, what does come mean? What does cuando mean? What does domani mean? What is, and so you start picking it up. And then within about 2 years for me, I was able to put all the pieces of the puzzle together. And then I guess a couple of years after that is when I started to perfect all the conjugations, because there are many. And then after that, I think it was really not perfecting, but get pretty close to phonically, being as close to, an Italian accent or as possible. And I wasn't perfect. People would say, we know you're not Italian, but we don't know you're American, which was good. We know you're not Italian, but it's pretty damn close. And they would say, you speak Italian better than most Italians do, which was really great. I was like, okay, yay me, because it was important. I really, so when I went on TV, I was already pretty primed. I was rather primed at that point. So yeah, that's how that happened.
Is it normal for, I don't know, careers to happen that way with, models from the U.S. getting, like, I've never really thought about that. Like, that's where your fame was even more out in a country that was not your original. I hear about that with sports players sometimes going and playing, overseas and being big stars, but I never really think about that in terms of, actresses.
A lot of American girls over there at the time. A lot of us were there. We had a lot of Italian girls, a lot of the American girls, and this is after the wall, after the wall fell in '89 in Germany. That's when we really said I was already out of the business, but they had, I was out of the business. By '89, I was out of the business, and that's when we started to see the influx of the girls from the West or the East coming in, from Eastern Germany, like all over, Croatia, all the different places that we didn't have that back in my day. As many different nationalities as Russia, we didn't have that, but we did after the wall fell. That's when they started to travel more. They were allowed to. They weren't allowed to up until then.
Yeah, fascinating. I'm curious. You at one point then decided that you're going to write a book. When did you write this book, and what led you to write it? Because you stand out as an expert on this topic now. That there's a few others out there who also speak heavily on the same topic. So how did that come to be?
Well, I think you become an expert in something that you know a lot about. So I didn't necessarily always have that happiest, healthiest self-esteem. And a lot of this also comes, remember, a lot of the stuff that we learn comes from the familial tribe. It comes from what we know. And I never want to bash parents, because that's not what this is all about. Remembering always that parents only project onto you what they learned themselves, right? And so a lot of people, especially back in the day, they didn't know anything about self-esteem, personal development, self-improvement.
Most of them still don't know much about it. Yeah. And this grand experiment called parenting. Yeah.
Very, very good. A lot of people don't really know, a lot of them don't know, especially, the older generations. But I knew that it was important for me. I knew that there was something more that I wanted to know about life than what I was taught. I didn't want to know about violence. I didn't want to know about, the things that were happening in my world as a young girl. And so as I was growing up and realizing, this thing called life is pretty triggering, and it really is something you kind of learn to navigate. I started to go to the 3 bookstores we used to have at the time, which were Border Books, Walden Books, and Barnes & Noble. And there's a little teeny section in the back, guys, called Self-Help. And it could have been more than 50, 60, maybe 70 books at tops. For what was, again, known as self-help. And that's where I absolutely lived. I mean, every book I could get my hands on is something that I bought and I would read. And then now, if you go out into Barnes & Noble, the only remaining bookstore, and walk down the aisles of personal development, it's book after book after row after row. It is $1 billion industry. And it's, and that should already give you a pretty good indication that we are still always looking for. First of all, we're always learning. We're always a work in progress. Hopefully we want to be a better person tomorrow than we are today, and we're doing everything we can to be able to do that. But the idea that it's $1 billion industry, whether it's books or courses or classes or meetups or wherever it is that we're finding our solace, is that. It's solace, it's guidance, it's assistance, it's help. It's understanding, that I don't think has ever really changed since, the Garden of Adam and Eve. And so, we're constantly, there's some really, really great philosophers, that have been around since probably the week after Adam and Eve, so people are always wanting to, to learn and to know, what am I here for? What's my purpose? There's always a lot of whys going on, and they want answers to. And so there you go. That was the reason that I wrote the book, was because I grew up in a home where there was, some difficulties in the childhood, some difficulties just with the parental piece. My parents were too young to be having children, and they did. And then, I saw along the way, my mother, for example, my mother would say, "Oh, please don't take a picture of me. I come out horrible in pictures. I look horrible in pictures." That's my mother.
She sure doesn't look horrible in pictures.
My mother. And so as a 5-year-old, 4-year-old, 6-year-old girl, here's my mother's, I think, high school picture. Beautiful.
Amazing, right? Yeah.
Oh, don't take my picture. I come out I look horrible. Don't take it. So what did I do in my life? I went and I had a picture. I became a model, right? My grandmother, who would say to me, I just really, as if my grandmother is a young girl. Okay.
It's amazing you have these pictures too. I love it.
I know, but it's a visual is always says a whole lot more than I could say in words. So my grandmother decides one day, I don't know, she's like 45, 50 years old, and she wants to lose some weight. So she takes 2 diet pills, swallows them, chokes on them, perforates her esophagus, and winds up 6 weeks in the hospital.
Oh my goodness.
This is
my diet pills for love.
in older years. This is in older years. But do you think my grandmother needed to lose weight?
No.
Okay. So now I'm seeing the women in my life who are beautiful women with lovely in every aspect, intelligent women, the whole package. And all they did was crap all over themselves. They had nothing nice to say about themselves ever. Fast forward. High school, the girls in toxic relationships, all that. Then I got into modeling, and not all the girls, but some of the girls were in toxic relationships, or they were, misusing alcohol and drugs. Or again, we're all finding ourselves in those years. Don't get me wrong, but I'm trying to figure out, like, where's the correlation between my mother in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, and the girls on, the most beautiful creatures on the planet? Like, what's going on here? And what the correlation was, a lack of happy, healthy self-esteem. So knowing that it was that important for me in my life, and I could see that everyone else needed a rah-rah session or a cheerleader friend, I decided, it was time to write the book. So the book was written in 2020. We had just gone into lockdown. It was picked up by Rowman and Littlefield in New York City, which is a traditional publisher. And the rest of history, guys. The book has been in Barnes & Noble for the last 2.5 years.
That's amazing.
And that's really cool. It's a great, great crowning moment, really, truly.
How much of your, those 70 books back in, 80s and 90s, that the books that you were kind of absorbing, how much of that shaped your mindset, or did it actually validate your mindset? Like you already had that, the books just validated it, or did they change your mindset?
Well, I think it validated, of course, there was a lot of validation for sure, which was really, really cool. I'll take a deeper dive on that validation piece. As I was, doing the book and taking a deeper dive into things, especially into myself, there were a couple of books that I did pick up that I didn't think I would ever pick up, but they came up when they say that you get the information that you need in the moment that you need it, right? And so as I was taking these deeper dives, there's a PhD, a doctor by the name of Dr. Elaine Aron, and she wrote a book called Extra Sensitive Persons. And so I knew that I'm an extra sensitive person. I'm triggered by a lot of things: loud music, loud noises, smells. It's like, and so people go, "Well, you're such a pain in the butt to be around." And I go, "Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to be a pain in the butt," But it's the way I'm wired. It's the synopsis, right? And so it was so good to take that deeper dive so I could be kinder to myself and know that 30% of the world has this dis-ease, and that is it Annalise Morissette? Is that her name? She's the spokesperson for this movement, right? So they've done documentaries, all kinds of things. It's a real thing. So when you come across somebody that has difficulty with it, it's probably because they don't want to be a diva. They don't want to be difficult. It's just kind of the way it is. there are certain things really have a hard time with. In fact, I don't cook in my house. I cook out back. I have a little kitchenette set up out there, and all the smells go out there because I can't do the smells, right? So, like, if I cooked fish tonight and I left the dishes in the sink and I came out tomorrow morning, I'd feel physically ill from the smell. Just to give you an idea, here's another one. There's a book called Aspergirls, not Asperger's, but Aspergirls. And of course, it's women that are on the spectrum. Okay, so I'm reading the book and I'm going, I'll be damned if I wasn't check. I'm going down this list and I'm going, holy schmoly, that's me. And so, it gives you, as you're looking for the reasons why, you also come across things that will give you solace and say, I'm not saying I'm Asperger's. I'm not saying I'm autistic. I'm saying I could be, by the way I'm wired, there are certain things that I might be, have to take a deeper dive. But it gave me permission to forgive myself, which was so empowering. It was so enlightening, right? To answer your question. So it's not just, self-esteem is not just about never compare yourself to anybody else. Well, that's all fine and good, right? We could do that all day long. But here's the thing about comparison, especially when it comes to social media right now, right? Perception. First of all, never compare yourself to anybody else. Yes, okay. Because you get to be you. And I know that the divine universe or God, however you want to call it, knew exactly what they were doing when they created you. So probably we all need to get over ourselves and just let a higher power know what they're doing, right? The other thing of being enough. I'm not enough. I don't feel like I'm good enough. Well, the opposite side of that is I am enough. You are enough. We are enough. Everybody's enough. So I looked up the definition of enough one day, and enough this is a description. Only as much as is required. Only as much as is required. Now, I don't know about you, but I know about me. And I know that I am so much more than enough. So that is now the new mantra. I am so much more than enough. Comparison. We always want, what do they say about the Joneses, right? Keeping up with the Joneses, because the Joneses have it one up. They've one-upped us in some way, shape, or form. So the grass is always greener on the other side. Well, I offer two things when I talk about the grass being greener on the other side, and that is the grass is always greener where you water it.
Mm-hmm.
Is it really grass or is it astroturf?
Right.
So is it reality or is it plastic? Is it perception? Is it what they want you to believe it is?
Yeah. I mean, comparison, it's such a vicious cycle that you can get sucked into and get consumed by it because you're just looking at the outside visual and not really knowing what's going on behind. And I've seen people get consumed by it and really mentally destroyed by it.
Comparison is the thief of joy, they say. Yeah.
Yeah. And absolutely, Art, and you're absolutely right. And can you imagine when you're faced with social media from the time you're 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 years old, and you're not happy the way you look. You only think you look good when you're throwing those filters at yourself.
Right.
There is a youth mental health crisis going on right now. And about 50% of our kids are either depressed, anxious, thinking of committing suicide, or have committed suicide. These are alarming numbers. This is scary stuff. Scary stuff. So we have to be really mindful about what we're teaching our kids, what we're allowing them to see, how long of a screen time we're giving them, and are we getting back to the kitchen table? With everybody's devices go up, keep them in your rooms. The next hour is, it's family time. And I think, even if an hour every day is family time, whereas it's really hard to do. I'm not a parent. I never had kids, guys. So I can only imagine what it's like right now trying to keep up, just on life and bringing up kids. I think it's one of the most difficult things to do. So, but I really also believe that, the glue that holds the family together is, connection.
Yeah. And both Michael and I have younger kids. He's older than mine, but we've talked about this before. As they get into teenage years and kind of social media influencing them, it's kind of scary. And it's well, how do we protect them. And my kids are only 5 and 3 right now. They have no screen at all. Well, just TV here and there. Because when we did introduce it to them once because of an airplane flight, it was like we gave them drugs. It was crack, and they changed. We saw the change in them. So one day my wife and I were like, that's it. We're cutting this. I don't care how much they're going to cry. And it was one day of crying. Now they don't even ask for it now. So it's good.
Yeah, and absolutely. I think the other thing that we can, attribute a lot of what we're seeing today, because our kids are angry. They're pissed. They are angry. It's an angry group of kids, and it's not necessarily their fault. If you start to think about 20, 25 years ago, when they started to come out with all the gaming, and 98% of gaming is all weapons. It's all killing. It's all anger. And it's not a great place for our kids to be. I mean, you can't be. When I was a kid, it was Cinderella, and it was all the princesses, and when we were growing up, it was Barbie and Ken. So let's just, it was a whole different world then.
G.I. Joe did get in there for the boys. That was the
Joe got in there for the boys. I know. It was really what you saw in a couple of movies, maybe. It was not at the level or the scale that it is today.
It is definitely interesting, Elijah. I feel like I should confess now. My kids are in on a screen right now, so I could record a podcast. I'm a bad person, maybe, but that's the reality of it right now. I'm like, that is what they're doing. But it's because at times for parents, it's like, well, you know what? Hey, this is the easiest way. Otherwise, right now, I'd have the little guy every now and then come up to me and be like, hey, can I, or I'm scared, or whatever it might be. Parents, it's my bet.
I'm going to go with screen time. I don't think screen time is a horrible thing if there's actually an educative process in it. If they're learning something, if they're entertained. Not that they're learning about AR-15s and who they're going to kill around the next, brick wall. There's
always that right balance to it. My wife and I had at least a moment the other day we were playing a game at dinner, and I forget the name of it. It's like, basically it's these questions you have on these cards about how well you know your family. And one of them came up, and my oldest son, who's 12, the question was, what's the one thing, he couldn't live without? And automatically my wife and I are both like, your devices, whatever it is. He goes, no. In the end, the answer was my family. I'm like, oh, phew. Yeah. That moment, you're like, all right. And then, of course, we were waiting for him to, then, okay, what do you want? Yeah.
There was this test that I saw where a group of, I think, psychologists or that in that field are asking adults, if you can have dinner with somebody, who would it be? All the adults are naming famous people, either dead or alive. Did they turn to their kids? Every kid said, I want to have dinner with my parents. And then I tested it on my son, and he said the same thing. It kind of brought a little bit of tears in my eyes, because I'm like, wow, that's what they want. That's what
exactly what they want. We really have to be mindful of that. The other thing that I love to tell men is, always be the man that you would want your daughter to marry. And that always kind of hits home with a lot of guys. It's like, wow, okay, shoot. Who am I at home in front of my girls? What am I teaching them? And, to accept and not accept. And that's when we're coming to boundaries with self-esteem. Huge. Boundaries are, boundaries are your way of teaching others how you will and will not be treated. Right. And so, little girls look a lot up to their mommies for many things. But I'll tell you, their first love and their first line of defense are their daddies. Little girls fall madly in love with their fathers when they're little. And if you're a good man, then they will remain in love with you forever. There'll be another guy eventually who'll come along and you're probably not going to like a lot. But, that you will always be your little girl's first love. So be the man that you would want for her.
Kind of going back to self-esteem, how do you correlate that besides life in general to the business world? Like, how does self-esteem play a role in wanting to climb up the ladder or, pursuing an entrepreneurial venture?
And the imposter syndrome is really, we talk about that a lot when we talk about business, whether it be corporate or entrepreneurialism. You talk about climbing a ladder. Yeah, that's corporate, but I still am climbing an entrepreneurial ladder because I'm constantly challenging myself, right? I don't have other coworkers to challenge. I challenge myself. So it's basically the same concept, and the imposter syndrome is still the lack of belief in self, right? It's that persistent, like, inability to believe that you're good enough and that your success was deserved, and that like you're legitimate, right? Like you legitimately achieve the results that you wanted to achieve. And so, that's another part of just, doing the self-esteem work. In the book, the first chapter is release, right? So we know we just got to get rid of all the stuff we thought was etched in stone, all the things that we have been taught. And remember, a lot of this stuff is generational, right? So whether our parents, grandparents, great-great-grandparents, whatever, they only knew what they knew and they passed it on. And so a lot of that stuff, believe it or not, is still really highly, I could still go to a family dinner now and still, my grandparents are long since passed, but I could still feel, hear, and see things that they taught us, so many years later. So you have to be really, really careful with, having the courage to be able to go ahead, do the work. You may have to leave some people behind, or at least distance them a little bit more. Some noses are going to get out of joint when you start working toward your what serves you and your life best, right? And so, again, going back to the imposter syndrome, it's really just belief and trust. It's that confidence, and in Latin or in Italian, it's confidere, which means with trust, right? And so, with trust, you have to learn how to trust yourself, trust your gut, trust your instinct, trust others, which is really hard for me. That's one that I have to constantly be working on. And to decry the daily demons, because those daily demons, unless you start getting the tools in the shed that you need at any given time, and the tools in the shed, I mean, again, going back to the courses, the classes, the books, the people, the meetups, your circle of influence, your circle of friends, the support groups that I talk about in the book, and in making sure that everything, in your life is as non-toxic as possible. I talk about non-toxic cosmetics. We talk about, what goes into our bodies is non-toxic. We talk about mindset being non-toxic, and this is a perfect example. The toxicity of the imposter syndrome is something that we have got to keep at bay, be mindful of, and constantly be, working on, stop comparing yourself, right, to influencers or role models or other people. For us, it's influencers as entrepreneurs, right? But people that are, around the water cooler kind of thing. So I think that you have to have a real passion for personal development, the investment of time that you put into yourself, and to create an emotional attachment to yourself and what is right at the end of the day when it comes to what it is you want to achieve. Keep your eye on the ball and stay focused on the work at hand and the task that needs to be done. Let's do that.
I want to ask you a question to kind of maybe drill into some of this a little bit, especially in a work environment, so not entrepreneur environment. How do you recommend somebody not to compare themselves to others when it's just natural to constantly say, hey, I'm doing that job, I can do it better. Why did they get a promotion and I didn't?
Well, that's politics. So, you can't fight politics when, self-esteem and politics are two completely different things. What you have to do, again, is to stop comparing yourself. And then, be putting yourself out there also. When you feel like you've been, beaten down a little bit by an office politics kind of thing, go hire, go volunteer for higher profile projects. You may have to put in a little more time. You may, as you're climbing that ladder that you were talking about, Art, and you might have to put in a little more time. But if you really want to I know the amount of time I put in to become who I am today. I worked endless hours. I started working when I was 10 years old. So a lot of people right now don't want to work. They don't have the incentive to work or the motivation to work, right? They really feel as though they are owed. Everybody, again, that participation trophy, right? Everybody is owed something. Well, I will tell you that doesn't always happen, but usually the ones that are, working the hardest and that are putting in the effort are the ones that are noticed. Whether office politics allows it or not, that's something different. You may want to move on to another company. I don't know. But you definitely want to be volunteering for those higher profile projects, because I think that's really important too. I think finding a mentor, a good trusted mentor, is another. Really go in and take a. For example, one really cool thing to do is what you guys are doing is a podcast, because you can reach so many people you never thought you'd be able to talk to. And we talked about LinkedIn pre-show, but you could reach a lot of different people through a podcast, because everybody loves to talk about themselves, and it's very difficult that they will say no if you're approaching them in the right way. And there's all kinds of templates and guidelines and things, in order to know how to do that properly. But by having, a podcast, an interview, say you're writing a book and you need to interview them, but finding those trusted mentors, people that are where you want to go. And then just kind of determine what makes you unique. You say, you compare yourself to other people, and well, nobody else is like you. This is what we talked about before. There's nobody else like you, and you get to be you. You are lucky that you get to be you. So keep doing you and keep working on it. That's really, really, really important. I think that you also need to give yourself some bandwidth to celebrate even the small wins. Doesn't have to be, everything you do has to be over the top, and even the little things can be really important. Speak up at meetings is another really, really big piece, because a lot of us tend to slump down in our chairs and cower down a little bit because of the fear factor, because of being afraid. But I think if you're really confident with trust in yourself, that you know what you're talking about, speak up, raise your hand. Don't be afraid, because fear has never gotten anybody one step further. And then do your best that you can to connect in a really positive and healthy way with your coworkers, and definitely avoid negative self-talk about yourself.
A lot of great things you said there. And I think taking it back to that piece around the politics, the way you solve that is profile, as you said, and then relationships, which is why you mentioned, even the mentor and some of the other things there, because that's usually what it comes down to. And if you can't solve for those in the workplace, then that place might not be the right spot for you. And there's maybe some internal reflection.
Well, look at what happened with the Great Resignation. Everybody, I'm going to resign. I'm going to have my own company. I'm going to be my own entrepreneur. But what a lot of people didn't count on, guys, is that if you don't want to work a 9 to 5, be prepared to work 24/7.
Right. It's so true. Yeah.
That's what an entrepreneur is.
That's leaving my 9 to 5 to work my 9 to 9. But sometimes there's more fulfillment there, and that's where it all depends on each individual and what they're looking for. What about for that person, though? Let's just say in that meeting, who, if they're listening right now and they're like, well, I know you say raise my hand, but I'm still too scared to do it. I'm afraid of that judgment. How would you hone in even further on that? Or is there anything specific you'd say to them? I know you said a couple of things, and I think those are critical, but I'm still, I still feel like it's so hard for some people to get past that. And it requires sometimes people such as ourselves in the meeting to be like, hey, what do you want to add to this? And then they will add, so we could all be advocates, but what about that person who's still struggling to advocate for themselves?
Yeah, I think that one of the first things that I might say around that is, when you raise your hands, and John Maxwell said this really, really well. It's like, sometimes you win and sometimes you learn, and so if you've really got to be able to be, and I know I went through this as a young kid too, with modeling, because there is no business in the world that is as rife with rejection as acting and modeling. I can promise you all that.
Yeah.
Let's get over that. Let's work on your soft skills, and even sometimes your soft skills are going to be some of the hardest work you will ever do in your life. So let's remember that. And then, fear is, they say face everything and rise and all those, acronyms. But, fear is one of those kind of things that it really will hold you back. But the minute you break through, it's like the greatest feeling in the world. So I say just, be bulldozer you sometimes when you have to bulldoze, really challenge yourself to bulldoze to raise your hand and say that thing, because, you never know exactly what what that reaction is going to be. And that's what I said. Sometimes you're going to win. And if it didn't work, well, you're going to learn. You're going to learn what was, what did work and what didn't work. It's kind of like, it's like failing, it's like your first attempt in learning, right? So if you're not in fear and you're not, if you're worried about fear and worried about failing, then you might as well not get up in the morning, because that's not realistic, because we're always going to have fear as human beings and we're always going to fail at something. But the good news about that, especially around failure, is, every time you fail, you're that much closer to success, right? You're that much closer to where you want to be. And so failure, I would say celebrate some of your failures and go, great, now I know what direction I'm not going in. Okay, let's pivot. And that's the only way you're really ever going to. Do you think that the first car that came off the assembly line was the perfect car? Or the first light bulb? No. So there have been a million iterations of cars and light bulbs since then. But, and I guarantee you that there have been, some massive failures along the way. So there you go. And that's really where, the low, so you got to work on the low self-esteem. Just, do the work that's in my book or other books, get out there. My book you're going to read. It's not a read about self-esteem. You're going to do self-esteem. There are 12 separate chapters with 12 separate, let's say modules and things that will walk you through the process. And if you do what's in there and really practice it, be really mindful about what you're reading and what you're learning.
That action, I think, is what's so critical, because then you start proving it yourself. And Art and I were both recently reading a book that, you wanted, the goal is that, I think in this case, they recommend, go ask for a discount with anything that you buy, going forward, because you want that rejection, because every rejection you have gets you closer to somebody who's going to say yes, just as a way to get past that, fear. And then you realize afterwards, why was I so worried about this? And I've heard of another one where they're lay down. Now, this might sound dangerous. Lay down on the sidewalk somewhere just to be super uncomfortable and have everybody, don't do that in New York maybe, but and just have everybody, get just to get okay with the idea, look, your worst case scenario, whatever that was, never usually comes to be. And I think one more thing to add to it too is that people, I'll say Art and I, as we were in, corporate America workplace and that, and I would guess based on what I picked up from you, you'd be similar, is that if somebody actually said to you, hey, I struggle with this and I would just love your help, pushing me a little bit out of that zone when I'm in a meeting or I'm wherever I'm at with you, I think we'd all be honored to do that. And I think that's another thing that so many times people get intimidated and are afraid to just ask. And asking can be that, I don't want to say miracle they need, but just that one thing that they need, because now they have somebody in their corner, and sometimes that accountability that's also going to just help them, push them past that elephant side of them. That's the emotional side that's scared, versus the rioter who's actually yeah, let's do this.
There are a lot of people that have, great issue with social anxiety, no matter what kind of social situation that is, whether it's, formal, informal, work, family, home, in love relationships, and people just have a really hard time with social anxiety. And so that's where I talk about, remember, fear of failure, failing is, not a bad thing. It's how we learn. It's really the only ways, apart from reading a book, is how we learn. We learn from failure. I mean, if I don't know any, do you know any human being that hasn't made a mistake or been out of failure in some way? No. So rumination is another one of those things. I made a mistake. I made a mistake. A week later, the mistake I made was really a month later. God, I really wish I hadn't made that mistake. That's one of those kind of things. If you think about it, constantly, you're only going to make it grow, right? It's kind of like that whole energy out to the universe thing, right? It's just going to grow. And so just, learn from it, move on. Learn from it and move on. And so, that's where I would say. And then, there's always going to be the herd mentality, right? That herd mentality is kind of like that human jail, right?
Yeah. I was going to say, it's so interesting too, in conversations or Michael and I doing separate coaching sessions, the fear that people have built in their head is so unrealistic too. It's this is never going to happen. Why even taking it that direction? And it's just finding a way to overcome that hurdle and say, that's not really realistic. Pull yourself up and go do it. And sometimes it's that nudge that somebody needs to feel confident in themselves, because they're seeing that others are confident in themselves.
Yeah, absolutely.
something else that just sticks in my head around this too, and I think about it, is we just talk about the things that we pick up when you were sharing your story earlier about your own, grandparents. When I think about my grandpa, and whenever you were at a meal with him, it's like he'd say, finish what's on your plate. Well, my grandpa, he came out of the Depression, and you didn't know when your next meal was. And it's like, that's the mentality. Whereas today, instead, we got to face something else where we're like, no, you need to stop when you're 80% full or whatever it is, because today, now, and who knows, maybe some of it came from that. But there's those things we pick up as kids. But I also think there's this interesting thing that happens to us, because back to these fears and these learnings. Well, when we're a child, when we're a baby, that's how we learn, is through the failures. You learn to walk by falling down a whole lot. You learn to crawl by, eating dirt. And
how many times did you fall off your bike when they took?
Yeah,
when
exactly. Or for whatever reason it is, even though actually some of those things, when you think about it, are even more scary as we get older. I think it's oftentimes when people get these scary no's or other things from people that it stops us from even wanting to ask anymore. Like this fear, even though, again, it's like, it shouldn't be that scary, but it is, and I've faced it, I'm sure other has. But that's what's crazy, is I think over time, especially because we don't have, I don't know, sometimes it's the right people guiding us or pointing out things to us like that's okay, or putting that other person in their spot when they were belittling someone that suddenly created this thing. But it's that interesting thing that if we could channel more of that child who was willing to try, anything and not be afraid of failure.
Yeah, I think we just have to let go of, a lot of people don't necessarily come from the greatest, backgrounds or, home life as kids. And so, even no matter what you were told, no matter what you were taught, and a lot of the things that we're told and taught are not necessarily what's best for us, right? So as I had said before, the courage that it's going to take to do the work in personal development and self-improvement is not always going to be easy. I talk about taking the high road, and that is what is kind of like my credo, right? So taking the high road, what does that mean? Well, it means honesty, integrity, gratitude, and honor. And so the value systems that we create for ourselves, a lot of times I'll ask somebody, well, what's your value system? Drop and give me 5 or whatever, and they always look at you like, with deer in the headlights, like, oh my God, what's a value? What's a value system? A lot of people don't know. A value system is really the blueprint for your life. It's who you are when no one else is looking. It's when you've got no one else accountable. You're accountable to no one else. It's how you show up on any given day in any given situation, whether it's at home or at work, right? Whether it's with your friends or your family, your mother, whatever that is. Who am I on any given day? So I show up again. As I said, I take the high road. I am radically honest. My integrity, I like to think, is kind of off the charts, kind of drives some people crazy, but oh well. And then gratitude, we all know that's a big one. I could give you 10, I can give you 20 right now, things off the top of my head that I'm grateful for on any given moment. And the other thing is gratitude and honor. Most people think that honor is something that has to do with just a military term. Well, it's so much more than that. Right? Again, it's one of those kind of things. It's your moral code. It's your moral compass. It's doing the right thing, always doing the right thing. Never cheating, never lying, never stealing. And these should be common practices. Just regular good manners. We just don't live that way anymore, and it can be a little. It could be a little scary for some people, because a lot of people don't think they can step up to that plate. It's not that hard.
To your point, it's a choice, and I think the more we are aware of it, and the more we hone in on that and decide what choice we want to make, that's the critical aspect of it.
Without a doubt. And I love that piece, because again, it's life's blueprint. So again, that life that you want to live, you need to create that every day, and you need to bring that blueprint with you wherever you go, and you need to make sure that you never deviate from that plan.
Yeah, that's I love it. Makes me think about, even when you say even your focus on gratitude, any of these, that I'll probably butcher it, but the whole idea of you have the 2 wolves in your life, call it dark, call it light. Well, which one is going to get bigger? Which one's going to survive? The one that you feed the most. And it's that interesting balance between what we're doing, and even to focus on gratitude. Not enough people put the time into that. Instead, it's the things that they don't have or they didn't get. And anyway, you said an assortment of other things around values that I also think is so critical, that you're right. Once more, nobody's taught to think about that. You hear about values. Some people hear about values the first time if you work for a company that's talking about core values, because they hadn't heard about it outside of that context, which
It's right. It's not really one of those things that are taught at home necessarily. I didn't, it's not where I learned it. But, I really think that, also remember that, again, a lot of this work is going to take tenacity, it's going to take courage, and it's going to take the willingness to want, again, to be a better person tomorrow than you were today, right? And so that therein lies the conundrum. That's a huge piece right there. So where's your driver? Where's that driving force? What keeps you motivated every day to say, I want to be, nope, I've got to be a better tomorrow than I was today. And then really put that into breath. That's not always easy. And the other thing is the courage that when I talk about taking the high road, we always hear about that extra mile, right? That extra mile, man, I'm going to tell you right now, it is the longest mile. It is the darkest mile. It's the scariest mile. It's raining. It's snowing. It's sleeting. It's hailing. There's mud on the ground. You don't have any boots on.
Uphill both ways.
There's very little light. Like, there's a wolf behind every tree, but there's a little dot of light at the end of that tunnel, at the end of that road. There's that little dot of light. And when you turn around and you're looking for friends and family to kind of like, come on, guys, let's forge ahead. There's nobody there. There's nobody there. And so that's where you have to really have the intention well set that you may be walking this path alone, and it will lead to isolation. And it's only when we're willing, Nietzsche said, it's only when we're willing to face the challenges of life that we are spiritually growing. So that I think is really important to remember. Don't be thinking that, the gang's all here and the crowd's going to be around and the support groups are always going to be helping you, or, you need to be creating the life that you want to create for yourself. And that may mean being alone and being isolated.
Which is the perfect segue for me to jump to Survivor. So I just have to ask on that. I mean, again, congratulations on winning that. My wife and I are huge fans of the show, but if I could, I don't know how I could find yours. I'd watch your episode because that would be great because I've never known somebody. Yeah. Right. I know. I was looking it up. I'm like, but I'm just curious to hear a little bit about your experience on that show, and probably, I'll just be quiet and I want to just hear about what that was like.
It was Italy, Celebrity Survivor, in 2010, Nicaragua. There were 12 of us, I think, in the beginning, and they kept adding a bunch of people, and it's a long story, but everything is real. I did not, you get a handful of rice every day and some coconuts if you could find them, and the guys would open them because they are some of the most difficult things to get to you will ever try. You've ever tried opening a coconut?
No, I have tried. It's not easy. Yeah.
Not easy at all. And then you get a slither, like a really teeny slither of coconut every day. It was great because it was a fabulous diet.
Right, exactly.
And I turned 53 on the island. So that was cool because they brought me a cake, and I cut that up and share it. I could either eat the whole thing or share it. Of course I was going to share it. And it was all real. It was all true. And people say, oh, is it really true? Or no, it's all true. But it was, again, I've never been married. I don't have children, and my plants are only cactus. And I have no. So for me, it's pretty easy to just get up and go. And I love my life like that. Like my suitcase is always packed. And I love the freedom that I can always get up and go. And that was one. I had to kind of twist my arm to do the show a little bit, but I was really glad that I did, because you talk about challenging yourself. It was quite the challenge. It was really quite the challenge. But it was tough, but I'm tougher.
Yeah, that's amazing. I just had a look at it too, because I'm like 2010, because I never realized this. They must use some of the same background, because that was when there was the U.S. version also in Nicaragua.
It was the U.S. version. I was in the Italian version.
Yeah, no, got it. But that's interesting to see that. I never thought about that. They leveraged the two different, why not? They have set up there and they have everything that, and I assume different hosts and everything like that as well that they have for that.
Yeah, the guy that was emceeing the show was married to Ivana Trump. And so we had Ivana on for 3 days, which was really, really cool, as we were sitting under torrential rains for 3 days. And remember that it's tropical, so no matter what happens, and it was in January, February, so it never really got hot enough to dry your clothes. And if it did dry the clothes, the clothes were always damp anyway. And you want to talk about uncomfortable. I want you to wear damp clothes for the next 3 months.
Oh, I bet.
No,
Yeah.
it was brutal in a lot of different ways. One of the things were the no-see-ums, because I am massacred my whole life. I've been massacred by mosquitoes, and the no-see-ums on this island were something out of a Hitchcock movie. I mean, like, it was brutal, brutal, brutal. I still have some scars on me from scratching.
I bet. No, I've seen some of those people there. I'm just like, oh my gosh. But they unfortunately did not take my audition tape, so I never made it on there, but I did try.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's one of the kind of things that I think it was an opportunity to jump on because the opportunity was there. And I'm glad I did it. But yeah, it was interesting.
That's awesome. Well, I'll still try to track it down. I don't know how I'm going to do that, but I will track it down.
I'll send you a couple of links on YouTube.
Okay. All right. That sounds perfect. For anybody who is listening and who wants to learn more about you, what's the best way for them to find you?
You just find me at clarissaburt.com or Clarissa Burt straight across social. Facebook, I think it's Clarissa Burt Official. And I'm not on Snapchat.
Got it. Fair.
Don't look for me there because I won't be there.
Yeah. Sounds good. And then your book's name one more time, just for everybody who might want to look for that.
Yeah. The Self-Esteem Regime. There you go.
Perfect. And we'll link to it below as well for everybody to find it. Arden, any last questions before we wrap up?
No, this has been such a fun and engaging conversation. So happy to have you on. And
Here's what I'll leave you guys with. Loyalty is when you have my back behind my back.
Absolutely. Those are the friends you want. So
yeah, those are the things you want in a relationship. So remember that as you're rebuilding and you're imagining your perfect life, make sure you surround yourself with those kind of people.
Love it. Thank you so much.
Yeah, and everybody, if there's any comments, questions, just drop them down below and share this episode because it's fantastic.
It is. Thanks, guys. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
See you in the next one.